Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, August 23rd, 2018, back to school day here in our little corner of the world. And so, nice quiet background today, but I tell you, I am not in love with the brand new schedule. I'm sure the kids are. Well, at least one of them is anyway. Our, I guess, rather progressive school system moved, well, a couple of years ago to the system whereby the high schoolers, the older the school kids, the later the school day starts. I think reflecting the new reality, which is one that fewer kids need to get out of school early for jobs after school that start in the mid-afternoon, at least in our school system. There are fewer kids doing that these days than used to be the case. And also, of course, letting the kids sleep a little longer, and that's a reality for high schoolers, too. They used to flip it the other way, and I think the old reality was kids wanted that time after school for work or, I don't know, or I guess perhaps for bringing in the harvest. In the olden days, though there are still kids working after school, now they're able to integrate that into work-study programs and get credit for it in high school. They still leave their school early, but the work they do not only puts money in their pocket, but puts credits on their transcript as well, and I think that's a nice compromise. Good for those kids. Not that I could get my lazy bum to get working, although that's the other reality, is if you're carrying the AP course load, even as a senior, then you really don't have much time left for after-school work anyway, other than homework. But the unfortunate side effect of all that is they have also moved the start time of the school late enough that now getting to the bus stop threatens the start of the show. One of the changes from last year is his bus comes a little later than it used to. And now, I guess the bus pickup time is, like minutes, literally minutes, and I mean just 2 or 3 before the start of the show. And we fell into some bad habits last year, and I ended up driving him down the street to the bus stop just to make sure he wouldn't miss the bus, because the drive to school would make me miss the start of the program. Now, if I'm driving him, and I'm driving him daily, I'm going to be running up the front steps in order to try to push the right buttons and get the show started, just to be out of breath, too, when I do it. Oh, and I can't shake that much because things start wobbling on the desk, and despite, all right, well, maybe we'll get rid of this. The pop filter on this microphone, it's just never fit right. Let's back away and rattle and poke things. There we go. Make a lot of microphone noise. It's just, I don't know. The flex arm thing that it's on doesn't really do the trick, and it keeps banging into the microphone every time I move. So that's out of here. All right, it's Thursday. That means we'll have Greg Dworkin help get us on track with actual news. Yesterday was a big day for processing the news from the day earlier, and it was almost like people were just celebrating the entire day, what had happened in the previous day, and like a news cycle was lost. So we'll just pretend it's the same day and continue to laugh and point. And I guess we'll probably pick up yet more examples of people who weren't previously willing to discuss, if not impeachment, then some sort of admonishment or other kind of punishment. Lots of they're not Trump stalwarts, but a lot of people who said they were, let's say, skeptical about such things, as Brett Stevens did the other day. There's more of that coming out. There's stories about what went on in the Manafort jury. Here's a good note. Let me add this to our discussion from yesterday. Josie Duffy Rice making an excellent point, though I'm not certain it's entirely, how shall we say, apt to this particular instance. But, we were discussing yesterday the Republican and pro-Trump objection that none of this was true, it was all a witch hunt, et cetera, and therefore you shouldn't believe too much, you shouldn't read anything into, say, the Michael Cohen allocution. and that it was all trumped up charges, and he was doing this somehow. Either Michael Cohen was trying to set up Donald Trump, or someone else had gotten to Cohen, or whatever. And then there was the objection. Well, you don't accept a plea bargain and an allocution like that in the case of non-crimes, and that part still stands. But I guess Maggie Haberman out there on Twitter making a slightly different point, which is, I mean, it's actually quite different. Prosecutors, she says, would not have accepted Cohen's plea if they didn't believe his information was truthful. And that's a slightly different point. I'm curious about in what context she was making it. Oh, I guess responding to Trump tweeting, I think yesterday's tweet, I feel very badly, as he said, for Paul Manafort and his wonderful family. It's a effed up family, quite honestly. But, okay, I feel badly for that family. That's certainly true. But he's complaining about all of this, and he was pro Manafort because he didn't break, unlike Michael Cohen, who did break and made up stories in order to get a deal, is how he put it. And Haberman here tweets, prosecutors wouldn't have accepted Cohen's plea if they didn't believe his information was truthful. And I would say that's not quite right, although I would stand by the difficulty posed by a federal judge accepting an allocution, a plea bargain, and agreeing to go ahead with sentencing someone over the objection that the things they confessed to are not crimes. That I think we still have a problem with. But Josie Duffy Rice pointing out very well the point well taken. She begins by saying, "I swear to God, you people are going to give me a stroke," and then goes into all caps and says, with respect to the question of whether or not prosecutors would accept Cohen's plea if they didn't believe his information was truthful, they do this every single day, each and every one, no days off. This is why the plea bargain system exists as it does. Manafort can be guilty without us lionizing law enforcement. I don't know why she was really speaking of Manafort in that instance, but I think perhaps she meant Michael Cohen. And that part is true. The prosecutors absolutely, and judges both, would absolutely accept a plea bargain where somebody pleads guilty to a crime that they said earlier they didn't commit, and they changed their plea. That's not a problem, nor is it a problem necessarily for prosecutors to accept a plea bargain on information that they don't necessarily believe is the case. But if somebody wants to allocate and plead guilty to a crime, they're happy to process things that way, and it might even advance their other cases. But the more narrow question of whether or not they would accept a plea bargain and impose sentencing for a crime that doesn't exist, that I think we still have a problem with. Maybe that's why she was focusing on Manafort rather than Cohen, but still lots to digest, and well worth keeping her point in mind. Greg Dworkin, who we also keep in mind, despite the fact that we're not letting him talk yet, I think maybe now's the time. And I usually don't have to.
You think?
Wait. Yeah, I usually don't have to wait. You just say, I'm here now, and it's time for me to go.
I'm good at interrupting.
All right.
I'm from New York. That's not a problem. In fact, as we like to say, if I'm not interrupting you, it means I'm not listening.
Right.
But there's a couple of different ways to slice this.
Let's slice.
Let me give the overall big picture.
Oh, okay. I'm ready for that. Sure.
Republicans and conservatives and Trump supporters are talking about impeachment.
Yeah.
Democrats are not.
Oh, yeah. And one of those strange twists where the Republicans run around and say, Democrats are talking about impeachment. You got to stop them.
No, we're talking about health care, Beto O'Rourke, how the generic ballots look in, the sort of things that you need to do to make sure that the swamp that Trump brought with him really does get cleaned up, because it's a culture of corruption. We're not talking about impeachment, and there's reasons for that. But let's concentrate on the Republicans for now.
Okay.
Who's talking about impeachment? Donald Trump is talking about impeachment.
That is
he's
fine.
scared that he's going to be impeached. So he goes on Fox News and says, you can't impeach me. The market's too good. It'll crash. You need me. I'm the only person that could do this. I am the one. That's basically
I remember that
only
speech.
I can keep the
alone.
Obama expansion going.
Right. Sure.
Wait a minute. Did I say that wrong?
No. Yes. Apparently so. I alone can continue with the other
fix
person.
The Obama economy. And, make it better.
And Melania says, "You're right. You are alone."
Yeah. And ask me if I care, says Melania. So, and ask us if we care about Melania, say the rest of us. So the background to all of this,
every single bit,
is that you have a lot of never-Trumpers in particular, but others in general. Never-Trumpers in particular talk about it outright. For example, here's Max Boot. Let me just read you the headline in the subheader.
He's got the most boot.
Yeah, but it'll give you the idea. Trump is an illegitimate president whose election is tainted by fraud, says the headline in the Washington Post.
That's true.
And the subheader here is Trump's claim that the Mueller
that guy,
Bobby Three Sticks investigation is a witch hunt. Just got the wind knocked out of it, which is true, because it's not a witch hunt if, like, everybody around you is a felon.
Yeah, a witch.
Including your fixer.
And, your fixer. And yourself, but yes, okay.
You haven't gotten to yourself yet, but I think a better, more coherent way to discuss it, I'm going to get Armando mad and pick on a conservative legal guy by the name of Jack Goldsmith, who writes for Lawfare, but also in this particular case is writing for the Weekly Standard, which continues to be a never-Trump holdout. And, describes the whole thing about being mad at Jeff Sessions and the Manafort and the Cohen stuff, but adds this. There's no candy coating for this president. 4 members of his presidential campaign are now felons, as is his hatchet man, Cohen, who accused the president in court of directing him to commit a federal crime. One can only imagine what these men will now tell Mueller about the possible past criminal behavior of Trump and his family, and possibly about their involvement in Russian meddling.
Yes.
Even before then, the Cohen accusation alone, combined with the president's lies and obstructions related to Russia, suffice to justify impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives. Impeachment and not criminal prosecution is the immediate danger for the president, since long-standing Justice Department rulings preclude criminal trials for sitting presidents. By the way, he could still be indicted. They just don't go through the trial until he leaves. And
also,
then
they could do that
send him away. They could do that. Impeachment is as much a political as a legal process, which is why the midterm elections and control of the House loom so large. And all of that is true.
Yes. Although I do think perhaps Trump is candy-coated.
Maybe. But part of the reason I wanted to hone in on this particular version of events that Goldsmith is telling is because he also discusses what next. In terms of what next, and as far as the Trump defense goes.
Okay.
In this context, and as Mueller proceeds apace, I like proceeding apace.
Yeah. It's the best way to proceed.
Yeah, I'd like to proceed actually a gallop, but, you get what you get. President Trump will be likely to deploy some combination of 2 tactics to try and save himself. This refers to some of the stuff you were talking about in the intro. First, he'll continue to draw a red line at his no collusion claim and insist that anything else Mueller finds is the harvest of an illegitimate Democratic witch hunt that seeks to overturn the election results through criminal process. This approach depends on Mueller finding no serious dirt on Trump related to Russian meddling. Of course, I don't believe that's true, so I think the whole thing's a crock there. It's just it's pushing it back. It's not getting rid of it. Even if that assumption holds, though, the mounting stench of criminality enclosing the Trump presidency may render the red line politically irrelevant. And that is why I'm adding now, not Goldsmith, why what happened on Tuesday is so important. You simply can't claim that it's all a witch hunt when one of the parties says, yes, I'm guilty.
Right.
It's not even like I was incorrectly or unfairly, sent up the river by the jury. I'm guilty. I'm telling you I'm guilty. Not only am I telling you I'm guilty, he's guilty too, my boss, the guy that told me to do it.
Yes.
Right? So that you can't just continue with this witch hunt. It just falls apart. And we have, evidence for that.
They're witches throwing themselves into the water.
And floating or sinking, which is why the president is also likely to deploy offensive weapons, says Goldsmith. And I find him offensive, and I think that that's perfectly sensible.
Yeah.
3 powers that a president can wield unilaterally with practically limitless discretion and with little constraining process are pardons, dismissals of executive officials, and security clearance revocations. Trump could bark orders today to pardon everybody Mueller's investigating except possibly himself, and even that's under debate, to fire Mueller and his team, as well as everybody in the Justice Department who didn't carry out this order, which is to say everybody in the Justice Department, right, and to yank the security clearances of anybody he didn't fire, which would seriously slow any federal investigation that remained. And I think people like Jeff Merkley and others in Congress were already tweeting yesterday, if you do these things, that's impeachable.
Oh, it is.
And that is about the only part of impeachment that Democrats are discussing. Uh-huh. Yes, you can do these things, don't do them. But Goldsmith goes on to ominously say, if you think the wounded corner Trump won't choose some version of this nuclear option, you haven't been paying attention.
Well, I haven't been, but okay.
Trump believes in his bones that raising the institutions around him brings him advantage, and even if that belief proves false in this context, he will enjoy trying to burn them down as he is consumed.
Okay. As long as he's consumed.
So the conservatives, from Max Boot to Goldsmith, all of the people who are saying don't, overreact, well, this isn't overreacting. This actually could happen because this is how he operates, and he's that cornered.
Yes. And
another Haberman tweet says something along those lines, too. People who know Trump say that he's never felt this cornered.
Oh.
And therefore, when you are this cornered, you lash out. So I'm simply saying that this is something to keep in mind because we may see some of this.
Okay, I hope we do. For the theater of it.
Yeah.
And also so that people say, all right, that's enough.
Right. While this is going on.
Right now.
There's a story in the Times.
Yes.
Republicans urge embattled incumbents to speak out on Trump.
Embattled incumbents. Okay.
The first time we've seen something like this. Senior Republican Party leaders began urging their most imperiled incumbents on Wednesday to speak out about the wrongdoing surrounding Trump, with Representative Tom Cole, a former House Republican campaign chairman, warning, where there's smoke, and there's a lot of smoke, there may well be fire. Republicans are coming to the realization, perhaps, not that let me put it a different way. Jonathan Bernstein, the political scientist, says you have to understand that people who are elected to office, I'm paraphrasing here, are basically paranoid. And what you have to try and do is figure out what they're paranoid about.
Okay.
For a long time, they've been paranoid about primaries. Rightly or wrongly, they've been afraid that if they're not super-duper House Freedom Caucus-style Tea Party-ish pro-Trump, they'll get primaried.
That is true.
Fact is, 90% or more don't lose those primaries when they get them. So maybe it's a proper fear, maybe it's not a proper fear, but remember, we're talking about people who are paranoid.
Yes, and they win their primaries after turning pro-Trump, so they think it worked.
Right. However, for example, the new Fox poll that came out yesterday shows that if the election for Congress were held today, would you vote for Democratic candidate in your district or Republican in your district, rotating that question? And if you had to vote, which way would you lean? And Democratic candidate 49, Republican candidate 38. That's an 11-point lead in the generic ballot that I'm trying to say.
Yes.
So as it gets closer to the election, and it looks more and more likely, 75, 76%, not a guarantee, but more likely that the Democrats take the House, all of a sudden they're waking up to the fact that, hey, maybe the general election is the bigger risk for me, the paranoid Republican congressman.
Yes.
And maybe 3 days before the election, I should do something about it.
That would be a little late, but, people...
I think it's a little late now, but that's the input, that's the meaning of this Jonathan Martin, Nicholas Fando story in the New York Times, who, by the way, have removed their bylines from their front page on the web, and I hate that.
Well, that's so something happens.
I need to know if it's a Patrick Healy story so I can avoid it.
I guess so. So, all right, so Jonathan Bernstein says it's time to...
It's time to be paranoid about the proper thing, which is whether or not you're going to keep your head and your skin and your job. And so what's happening here is Democrats are hammering the culture of corruption here without talking about impeachment. They don't have to talk about impeachment. They just talk about the fact that Trump is surrounded by felons and he's probably guilty of a bunch of stuff.
Yes.
You can, connect the dots after that, and the Republicans are saying, hey, maybe I should say something about this.
Deploy the Etch-a-Sketch. You were
I didn't
pro-Trump
give
in
it
the
to
primary.
you, but separately, Dave Hopkins, a political scientist, says, Beto O'Rourke is doing so well in Texas.
Yes.
By the way, do you know what his real name is?
Alberto, maybe? What?
Who?
Roberto, okay.
Robert Francis O'Rourke.
Okay.
As in Robert Francis Kennedy.
Oh.
RFK.
Yes.
Who he resembled in his style. And so RFK, and by the way,
but he's
Roberto, nicknamed Beto. That's where you get the Beto from.
Mm-hmm.
So he's running a populist campaign and doing great and looking like a statesman. And Ted Cruz, this Dave Hopkins article talks about, is reinventing himself. Everybody knew he was totally insincere in everything he does, which is why everybody hates him in Congress.
Yes.
But he's gone from Tea Party high priest to all of a sudden, what's really important is I do stuff for my constituents, like help with the hurricanes in Houston and stuff.
Yes. When did we have those again?
So all of a sudden, he's got a 4-point lead in the latest poll, which isn't much.
Okay.
And Beto has a huge hill to climb because there's a lot of undecideds and the negative campaigning hasn't started yet. He's got one of those winning personalities that may help him. There's this viral video going around in terms of how he handles a question from a veteran, or it looks like a veteran, about kneeling at NFL games, and it's just a fantastic response. No,
Thank you for bringing that up. He says.
Thank you for bringing that up, and we have to understand that both sides, have a point of view here, and we have to respect that. But I don't think it's disrespectful. And let me give you the history of Martin Luther King and nonviolent protest.
Yeah, it was pretty well executed. That's why it's gone viral.
Right. That may not be enough to win. It is Texas.
Right.
But the point is
what does that mean?
That Republicans are feeling the heat enough so that they're changing their tune. They're trying to present themselves in a different way. And, of course, Ted Cruz is the most egregious because everybody knows Cruz doesn't believe in anything except getting reelected. So when he does stuff like that, somehow or other comes across as insincere, running against the very sincere Beto O'Rourke. So that'll be an interesting race to watch. But for the rest of the Republicans, as this article says, they're all being told, if you are in one of those really tight races, it's okay to criticize the president. It's okay. You can do that. And that's a first.
We'll see whether he comes around to doing that or not. He's a big convert, Cruz is. I wonder how he feels about those steel tariffs. I know how much he loves Campbell's soup and how important the steel tariffs apparently are to Campbell's soup, according to Wilbur Ross anyway. So the fact that there's more than one politician running around with cans of soup troubles
So,
me.
as the Times article says, by urging some candidates to speak out or at least stay silent, Republican leaders who gravely fear losing control of the House risk opening the first significant rift between the Trump White House and the Republican-controlled Capitol. Now, I'm just saying, longest journey starts with smallest steps. It's got to start somewhere, and this is where it starts.
Okay, that's a good place.
Anybody who says this is not disturbing is not being honest, said Mr. Cole. On cue, Representative Carlos Corbello, Republican of Florida, called the accumulation of Trump-related scandals a sad chapter in our country's politics and said nobody is above the law. Corbello's in a tough re-election fight, but he should win. And he also reproached the president for his caustic attacks on the special counsel Robert S. Mueller III, Bobby Three Sticks. So the thing is, Corbello's in a district that voted for Clinton, but he's well known enough in his district and has made his own personality and his own issues well enough so that he should do okay. And let me just throw in before the break, there's also some interesting data being presented on the internet, I think in Crystal Ball, Kyle Kondik, and Larry Sabato's place, about how incumbency isn't all that helpful, at least in the last decade or so. It doesn't protect you that much. And the interesting twist on that is it's also true that the longer you have been there doesn't mean anything. You get some help from being an incumbent, but you get no help from being a 16-time incumbent as opposed to a 2-time incumbent.
Oh.
Think Joe Crowley.
Okay.
I mean, that's an example of how, no, it's not like super protective. It's not protective like gerrymandering would be, or maybe it is, because maybe it gives you a slight advantage, which can be overcome. But, the point is that just because you've been there doesn't mean you're going to be there. They all know that because, remember, they're paranoid. And the one thing they were all paranoid about is keeping their jobs.
Yes. Well, okay, we can understand this.
Well, that's why bad news helps our republic and our democracy, and in this case, Democrats, because you got to keep hammering on the bad news for Trump, because that's the stuff that makes them paranoid enough to start acting like human beings.
All right.
Where's my compassion? I just discovered it. Why? No. Because I might not get elected. It proves.
It happens this way, and the motivation doesn't have to be pure. Just so long as you come around to the realization that, I want to do the right thing. Once in a while.
I got to do the right thing to get myself reelected.
Yeah, well, that's all contemplated by the founders, and everybody knows if the founders contemplated it, it's got to be awesome.
Or as FDR used to say, I agree with you, now make me do it.
Yes, that's exactly it. These are the ways to make people do these things. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's see. We're coming up on our break, but not quite there yet. If you want to sneak in a preview or just
I want to
about
talk
FDR
a little bit more about impeachment and then a little bit of polling, too.
Nobody's talking about impeachment, but
right.
All right.
But the other thing I want to talk about is the jury.
Oh, yes.
The Manafort stuff. I think it's just fascinating. So we're going to hit that on the other side of the break.
Okay. Well, here's the music that tells us this side of the break is coming up. We got 30 seconds to talk about the break, I guess. It's going to be a great break. It's going to last about 2 minutes. You'll love it. I love it. You won't hear us. You'll hear some music, maybe a fundraising pitch or two. By the way, yes, if you are considering, I know none of you are considering joining the GoFundMe for Michael Cohen. Don't waste your money there. Send it here. We could use it a lot better than he could. He's not your pal. Don't worry about that. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Time to rejoin our discussion with Greg Dworkin. And what did we tease him with before we left? Yes.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the Manafort trial and the holdout in the convicting him of everything. But again, larger picture there is just consider this as a great example of what happens when President Trump only watches Fox News.
Oh. Okay. Yes.
It explains his tweets and it explains his actions this morning.
Right. Okay. Got it.
He was on Fox and Friends giving an interview talking about stuff. Yes. Or where did that come from? Well, if you realize a lot of it came from Fox the night before, then it makes a little bit more sense.
That's the only way it makes sense. Literally, there are stories you'll see nowhere else, which they think is a point of pride, but
and we'll get to that.
Fake.
A point of white pride. So in this particular case. Here's the article, National Security. It's called Matt Zapotowski is the reporter in the Washington Post. Lone holdout on Manafort jury blocked conviction on all counts, juror says.
Yes, okay.
Now, the fascinating thing is this is a Trump-leaning juror being interviewed on Fox News. Her name is Paula Duncan. Yes, the jurors voted to keep themselves unnamed, but they can name themselves if they want to, I suppose.
I guess. Yes.
I say that because I am not a lawyer and don't play one on the internets, but, apparently they did, so apparently they can.
Yeah, right. I mean, here it has happened. We don't know why or whether that's a problem, but we got the name. Paula Duncan.
A juror in the trial of Paul Manafort said Wednesday that all but one of the jurors wanted to convict President Trump's former campaign chairman on every charge he faced. Though, remember, she's a Trump leader, She criticized special counsel prosecutors as seeming bored through the trial and said she believed their true motive was to get the dirt on Trump.
Yeah.
The juror, who spoke on the record to Fox News and gave her name as Paula Duncan. That's great. Maybe her name isn't Paula Duncan,
Right,
but that's what she said
possible.
she was.
Yeah, you got to watch out for that.
Yeah, reporters are very detailed sometimes.
Her name is Paula Duncan 02593.
Yeah, she announced her name as Paula Duncan, although we
Right.
couldn't confirm this.
She's just a
Said
cutout
jurors
troll.
again and again laid out for the lone holdout the evidence that persuaded them Manafort was guilty, but the holdout, a female, said she harbored reasonable doubt. Duncan said the evidence was overwhelming, pointing to prosecutors' extensive paper trail. I didn't want Paul Manafort to be guilty, but he was, and nobody's above the law. And I keep thinking to myself, okay, trying to talk to this lone holdout is like trying to talk to a Trump rally voter about the truth, you know.
Well, is
Here,
she,
but it's this. Yeah, fake news. I don't believe it.
is she the lone holdout describing her own experience, or is she
No,
saying...
she's described another woman who was the holdout. She voted to convict.
So there were two Trump-supporting women on this jury.
There's one Trump-supporting woman, Duncan, self-professed. The other one, we don't know who they supported. I'm just saying she reminds me of a Trump voter.
Oh, I see. Okay.
In the way that she had all the evidence there, no matter how logically you laid it out, wasn't biting.
At least not on some of the counts.
Jurors ultimately convicted Manafort of 8 of the 18 charges. And by the way, I looked it up, and it is true that Al Capone was convicted of 5 of 23.
Oh, so the records are improving.
So it's not like you can say, okay, well, most of the charges he didn't get convicted on, therefore it didn't count.
Right.
Well, that's not how it works.
Yeah,
He's a felon.
Yeah, he'll get less years in prison from having, not been
Actually,
convicted
the
of
other
all
part
it.
of it is that may not be true either. I mean, at
well.
least the amount of years in prison the
Yes.
other charges would have added doesn't appear to be a lot from people who know more about this than I do.
And of course, if you die there, it doesn't matter.
If you're 68 or 69 or whatever and you get 20 years versus 40 years, what's the difference?
Right. Free health care, though. That's good.
Democratic socialism. I love it. Jurors ultimately convicted Manafort of 8 of the 18 charges. He faced for bank fraud, tax fraud, and failing to fire reports, fire the guy that didn't file the reports of his foreign bank accounts, and couldn't reach consensus on the remaining 10. Prosecutors had accused Manafort of failing to pay taxes on $15 million and of trying to defraud banks. Now remember, he was convicted on each of those things, just not all of those things in each category.
I see.
So Duncan, who identified herself as a supporter of Trump, is the first juror to speak publicly about the trial and the jury's deliberations. She said it was tense. One juror would side with the majority, later claimed to have felt pressure, wanted to change the vote. There were tears. In other words, this is how juries work. It's like real people trying to come to a conclusion. And as she herself said, I'm a Trump supporter. I didn't want Manafort to be guilty. It's just, we had this one problem. He was.
Yeah, well, that's why Republicans don't trust juries. They come to sometimes reasonable conclusions as real people will, and that's too risky.
Right.
why
We
I
all
don't
tried
like
to
voting.
convince her to look at the paper trail. We laid it out in front of her again and again, and she still said she had reasonable doubt. And that's the way the jury worked. We didn't want it to be hung. We were all hungry. We wanted to go to lunch. So we tried for an extended period of time to convince her. In the end, she held out. That's why I called her a Trump-like voter,
I see.
even though I don't know where her true political convictions are. Right? But the point is that just because you had this incredible paper trail, that wasn't enough. What do you have doubt about? I'll tell you what they had doubt about. They didn't believe a word Bill Gates said.
Who?
Bill Gates, whatever his name is.
Oh.
Gates.
Yeah, the other Gates.
The other Gates.
Rick Gates.
Rick Gates, yeah. They didn't believe a word that Gates said, so the defense did a good job in that. But they didn't like the defense either because they felt everybody was being lackadaisical. Duncan said she was underwhelmed by Manafort's defense and seemed to acknowledge in response to a question that Manafort's decision not to testify influenced the decision, even though the judge told her not to hold it against Manafort. Just based on what I saw, what I heard, I think I would have liked to have heard a little more from the defense. They gave a very easygoing atmosphere to the whole thing. They objected to very little and appeared agreeable throughout it all. Now, this is interesting because here you have a non-professional jury. That's what we have in this country.
Right.
You have an ordinary citizen there, and they're shocked and befuddled by the fact that the professionals in the courtroom, the lawyers, appear to be at ease in what they're doing, smooth and relaxed, and they talk to each other as if they can get along, even though they're on opposite sides of this horribly contentious issue.
Yes, we want confrontation, like in our politics.
I mean, that's what she seems to be. Everybody's so easygoing about this. Well, because this is what they do for a living.
Nobody,
they know each other, and
yeah.
There's no reason to be hostile unless it's part of your strategy.
It's not like it is in the movies. Everybody can handle the truth. It's
I
very
think
boring.
it's so fascinating. Yeah, it's not like confronting Jack Nicholson on this. That's not how it works.
No, very rarely. Although it's interesting now, throwing out there that they ignored the judge's instructions is an interesting tactic, and it might interest the defense in making some sort of an appeal. And
it also might interest the prosecution in terms of how much you rely on Rick Gates for the next trial.
Yes, that's true.
In other words, you better back it up. Just like with Michael Cohen and whatever he says, you better back it up with evidence.
And then another of the professional calculations to not put on a defense. I remind you, as you were reading her comments, the defense was underwhelming and lackadaisical. They didn't. Technically, they made no defense. They cross-examined prosecution witnesses, but they didn't mount a defense at all. When it was their turn to present their view of the case, they waived the right to do that and proceeded directly to send the case to the jury. And that must have surprised them.
I'll let actual lawyers, talk about what lawyers actually do and how it looks to them through their eyes. But here was the part that was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Duncan also said the case was politicized. Prosecutors tried to make the case about the Russian collusion right from the beginning, and of course the judge shut them down. Yeah. We did waste a bit of time with that shenanigans.
Okay.
So she's somebody who comes into this thinking Russian collusion is a crock.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Duncan noted accurately that the evidence included references to Trump, particularly when it came to Manafort's dealings with a bank chairman who wanted a job in the administration. Mm-hmm. Asked if she agreed with the judge's assessment before the trial that the special counsel hoped to use Manafort to seek information from Trump, Duncan responded, "Exactly. I think they used Manafort to try to get the dirt on Trump or hoping that he would flip on Trump," she said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Right. I mean,
if you have no dirt and if the guy's innocent, what difference is it? You don't flip on somebody who's innocent.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I don't even. I'm trying to wrap my head around what that concept is. But the reason I wanted to bring to your attention is the words that she used. I think they used Manafort to try to get the dirt on him or hoping he would flip. Yeah. That's what she said. So this morning on Fox, Trump says it's called flipping. Yeah. And it almost ought to be illegal. They go from 10 years to they're a national hero. They have a statue erected in their honor. It's not a fair thing. So this lady talks about flipping on Fox last night, and then Trump is waxing eloquent about flipping on Fox this morning.
Right. Okay. I see. And it's not called flipping. It's what?
Well, it is by her on Fox.
Well,
therefore, it is called flipping because I'm the president and I say it is.
It's called flipping in the movies when we try to describe what we think mobsters call it, but it's called, turning state's evidence or.
They're not called rats, but I'm calling them rats because I saw it in the movies. Yeah. That's what you. I watch The Sopranos. I know what's going on.
Yes, exactly. So, interesting. And so he calls for that to be illegal, and lots of people pointing out, yes, the President of the United States thinks that people cooperating with prosecutors should be illegal. Okay. Right. That's a great idea.
Separately last night on the White Power Hour with Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
Tucker starts talking about planned land reform in South Africa to try to undo some of the apartheid damage.
Huge issue here in America.
Trump sees this and asks Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to look into it.
Look into it. Read a newspaper, man.
President Trump on Wednesday night said he was directing Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to closely study the South Africa land and farm seizures as well as the killing of farmers. He then quoted Tucker Carlson, the Fox News host, who earlier Wednesday had railed against plans by South Africa's ruling party to pursue constitutional change allowing the government to redistribute land without compensation. The measures designed to redress racial inequalities that have persisted nearly a quarter century after the end of apartheid in 1994. The episode represented a case study in how the president runs his administration. This is a Washington Post story. The apparent basis of Trump's directions to the nation's top diplomat were accusations leveled by Fox that echo talking points used by white nationalist groups, including an organization that has referred to the so-called apartheid and the so-called historical injustices of the past. So Trump tweeted last night at 10:28 p.m., I've asked the Secretary of State, Secretary Pompeo, to closely study the South Africa land and farm seizures and expropriations and large-scale killing of farmers. South Africa government is now seizing land from white farmers, Tucker Carlson, Fox News.
Yeah.
South African government was not happy about this, rejected it, so on and so forth. But Daniel Dale, who we all know is keeping track of Trump's lies,
yes,
writes for the Toronto Star, says this is the first time Trump has used the word Africa on Twitter as president to express support for white people on the recommendation of white nationalist Fox host.
Wow. Okay.
That is a wow. But again, we are being governed by whatever was on Fox, and that's why what's on Fox and Friends winds up, being in the news. Another version of this is Newt Gingrich, one of my favorite people, as you know. You can consider this Newt is a pig part LVII. Mark Berman tweets, and Mark Berman is a national reporter for the Washington Post. A young woman is dead in Iowa, he's talking about. And here's how a former Speaker of the House reacted, emailing a reporter about her to Axios. No, emailing a reporter about her and saying this via Axios. I don't know exactly who he emailed. Newt Gingrich emailed me to make sure I'd be covering the story, and I asked for his take on why it matters. This is what Gingrich said. We're living in two alternative political universes. In one, Manafort Cohen is dispositive, and the other, illegal immigrants killing Molly Tibbetts is dispositive. If Molly Tibbetts is a household name by October, Democrats will be in deep trouble. If we can be blocked by Manafort Cohen, then the GOP can lose the House badly. So he's basically writing the report and saying, look, this is important because we need to use the unfortunate death of whoever she is, who cares, as political fodder and make it like, George H.W. Bush running against Mike Dukakis, letting people out of prison for sinister purposes with black and white footage and scary music in the background, because that's what we do.
Now, you say whoever she is, who cares? We're speaking here as Newt Gingrich. They don't care. I mean, they know the name, but they
just want to make it into a political issue.
They need the name and a picture of a white woman, and that's all there is. Who was she? How did she die? But besides how she was killed, no interest. What did she do for a living? What was she like as a person? What do we lose by losing her? I don't know. The point is, Republicans
want to make this election about white supremacy and impeachment.
I don't know what she was like, but does she have a bloody shirt? That's what I want to know. So here we go.
That's what they're going to be running on.
Hooray.
But whether or not that's going to work, Republican leaders are a little bit worried it won't, and so they've given their troops permission to maybe, like if you have a really tough race, you can also say maybe Trump didn't do everything correctly. Okay.
Well, it ranks up there among Newt's worst. I guess this is his worst tweets since his Auschwitz tweets. So he's a careful,
horrible
and considered
person,
guy.
I just thought it was a good reminder.
Yes.
Now, I just wanted to bring up some polling here because I think, the fact that the Democrats really don't want to talk about impeachment, they want to talk about corruption, they want to talk about health care, they want to talk about, what really is America, like Beto O'Rourke.
Yes.
Civics follows a specific question, which is impeachment. Would you support or oppose impeaching Donald Trump?
Yes, I would.
Well, this morning's results are 47% oppose and 46% support. And if you look at independents, then it's 47 opposed, 44 support. Democrats are only 82% support, 8% opposed. Republicans are 93 opposed and 5% support. I like that 5%. I'd really like to talk to them. That's who I direct my I don't mind stealing 5% out of their vote. It's enough to win in close races.
Okay.
But the point is, it's not overall popular yet. This stuff has to sink in and get into the body politic, and everybody has to understand at the gut level what we understood back in the 70s. Nixon really is a crook.
Yes.
Once you knew that and knew it in your gut, the details didn't matter and you knew what to do. That hasn't happened yet. It will, because Trump is everything we said he was at the beginning. But that has to sink in. It hasn't done so yet.
Okay.
That's why Democrats don't want to talk about impeachment 5 days before the election, whatever that number is.
Okay. I am willing to indulge some of that. I mean,
I'll give it a couple of months.
yeah, I did see an interesting...
November 15th, I'm ready to talk about it.
Okay, that'll be fine. And maybe we'll share this a little later on. I did see an interesting take on why a good and liberal friend of ours would say, I'm not ready for them to talk impeachment, even should Democrats retake the House. So I want to wait a little bit. Interesting reasoning. Long story short, I guess, is put in the second of his tweet storm, Brad Reed speaking here and saying, my reasoning is simple. There are simply a lot more crimes and scandals yet to be uncovered. Impeaching Trump for a mere count of campaign finance fraud would be foolish when there are other crimes to be discovered. And I think that's largely true. I mean, basically he says, look, he deserves to be thoroughly repudiated and humiliated on every front on which he's committed an egregious offense. I agree with
It's like
that.
the Nixon thing. You got to reject him, and then you can go ahead and do the process that solidifies that.
I would
but you
hate
got to
for-
reject him in your heart
Yeah.
first.
And I mean, what the Republican excuse for the campaign finance crime is. Not really a crime, shouldn't be a crime. And if that were his
Besides, Obama
impeachment,
did it.
yeah, and everybody else does,
Did you
etc.
see that?
Yeah, I've seen that
They said
leveled.
it. You know what Obama
Who said
did?
it?
Obama didn't actually. It was his campaign, and they were late in reporting some things.
Yeah. I mean,
That's it. And they do the whataboutism. Everybody does it. Look.
Yeah. Well, I was pointing out late in
I
yesterday's
just mass
show.
murdered 97 people in the local Home Depot, but look, that guy jaywalked. Everybody breaks the law.
Crime is crime, man.
Crime is crime. What are you doing here? So, I mean, it's the dumbest thing, but that's what they're doing.
Yes.
And that is why other people take the same point that Brad made and say, look, what we have to do is say we need accountability. And so what we're going to do when we get the House back is we're going to start investigating this stuff. To his point, I'm sure we'll come up with stuff because it's there right in front of your nose. That's why we're investigating. We're not making this up. It's not a witch hunt, But once you have what he did, then you can decide what to do about it. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation on Twitter the other day after our show with a fellow named Thelonious, one of our very good listeners, who said to me, "Okay, so what are you saying here? Are you trying to advise the candidates about what to say? Are you talking to the activists and telling us to back off?" And it's a great question. And that's, I pointed out to him the difference, as we often do on the show, between an advocate and an activist.
Yes.
Activists are outside the system and have to push the envelope. I'm not telling people not to do that if you're an activist. But if you're an advocate within the system, or if you are a candidate yourself, you have to calibrate slightly differently. You have a different job than activists do. It's the FDR. I like what you're saying. Make me do it. Right? FDR isn't going to say, well, I'm going to be the activist here. I'm telling the activists, push me, help me, make it so that it's politically expedient for me to do what you want me to do. That's your job. My job is to get it done.
That's true, too.
Different jobs. So if Claire McCaskill doesn't come out and say, I want to impeach, or Joe Manchin doesn't, lay off him.
At least, well, I mean, if you're in the strategy business, you certainly want to do that. And
right, if you want to make the case to them, that's great. Go ahead and do that. I'm not telling you not to do that. Just don't be disappointed and angry and start cursing them out if they don't automatically say what you say.
That, and there's probably a larger point there, and I guess I would say at this juncture you don't want to say things like, "Well, that's it. I am voting for the other guy."
Why doesn't Nancy Pelosi go all in on impeachment? I want her out. No, that's not really very logical. You can want her out for other reasons and make it good, but that's not the reason.
Now, here I was thinking this morning we get around to another. I guess if you're dead set on advocating for Nancy Pelosi's replacement, here's a new angle for you. How well would it go over to impeach Trump? And let's say, because so many people then come back to me with Pence will be worse, and lots of people then answer that but say, well, Pence is implicated too. How does it go over to let's say impeach Trump and then Pence? And then, of course, the job falls to Nancy Pelosi. I guess you could say, well, given the sensitivities in the country, and what would the optics be of impeaching the entire administration and replacing them with Nancy Pelosi in particular? Interesting question. Of course, on the other hand, if you were going to select a new speaker who might actually then be elevated to the presidency, you may
want
want
them
somebody
qualified
who
for
would,
the job, I would think.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
might.
been our whole point about why we don't like Trump.
Yeah. So that's something to think about. Another complication.
Of course, don't forget, process says that if you want to elect a speaker, they don't actually have to be a member of the House.
That's true, too.
So you could make Oprah your next speaker and then go ahead and do your impeachment, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could from a process point of view.
I would. I mean, I was going to say maybe not Oprah, but maybe Oprah. Sure.
Well, everybody wants Oprah to run against Trump because it's Celebrityville now, and that's how you get things done.
Select Jane Q. placeholder of, give me a good city, Ottumwa.
Funny thing is, that's my actual name.
Right, that's who I'm looking for.
I'm married to John F.
Estes.
placeholder, and we come from a long family of placeholders, but, just elect me.
Right.
I'm a placeholder.
My middle name is blank, so that would be great. Oh, yes, she's Jane Blank, Jane B. placeholder. What's the B for? Blank. My maiden name blank.
So I when you get a Democratic majority in the House, they can vote for whoever they want to, and they'll decide.
This is
right.
True.
First, get the majority.
Yes.
Then worry about that.
Right. And so that's a thing you could do too, right? We're going to elect so-and-so Speaker of the House because these two are getting impeached. And then that person will become president. And then we'll need a speaker again because there will be a vacancy, and that'll be Pelosi.
But okay. So let's say the Democrats win the House and then you elect a speaker. And then you do your investigation and your due diligence. You do it properly and you find out there really are high crimes and misdemeanors. And the House decides to vote to impeach the president. And then it gets tried in the Senate.
Right.
Okay?
Sure.
And so now what happens to Pence and to Trump is up to the Senate. Mm-hmm. Correct?
Yes.
So this whole thing about, well, how would it look if you're talking about replacing those guys with Pelosi?
True.
It doesn't matter how it looks.
That's
it's not up
point.
to you anymore.
Well, all I did was say you should try him.
It's up to how it looks in the Senate, and if you don't have the data to support impeachment, that's what's going to matter, not whether it's going to be Pelosi. So let's, just calm down about, what are the optics of replacing Trump with Pelosi? Actually, to me, the optics look pretty good, and to the Senate, it'll look the way it looks, and that part isn't up to you anymore.
Now let's get real weird.
Public. Yeah. It's just not up to you. Well, that's not how the process works.
Okay, we'll deal with the optics. Well, here's an idea: make a Republican, moderate-ish, to the extent they still exist, moderate Republican
because that way
senator
it's a
speaker.
Compromise.
Yeah,
I think we should compromise because that's what we Democrats do. I think we should put Newt Gingrich in there because that'll deal with them.
Well, I mean, it would be interesting to take somebody, but actually to take someone from the ranks of the Republican conference in the Senate and take a vote off the table. So that might be interesting. But then which one, and if there's a Republican who might be likely to vote for impeachment, you want them to stay there. You want to remove one who won't, but then if they weren't going to vote for impeachment, they're probably nuts, and you don't want to make them president.
Why don't we make Obama speaker?
There you go. Michelle?
No reason to say you can't, right?
Right.
He already knows how to be president.
How old are the kids? Can we do this?
Not quite old enough yet.
Right, okay.
I don't even know if Beto O'Rourke is old enough yet.
Oh, yeah, maybe not. The dog, Bo?
But, the point of all of that is you're getting a little ahead of your skis, as they like to say in Washington, talking about who is going to be the speaker because impeachment, and therefore you have to worry about that.
Which skis are we talking about?
Don't worry about that. Why don't you just elect the Democratic majority first and then go from there?
All right, well, that's the place to start.
Right. And with that, I've already overextended my stay, but thanks so much for having me on. Lots of interesting stuff to talk about today. We got other stuff, the Georgia county that wants to get rid of all polling places because they happen to have too many black people there.
Right. And not enough disabled access. Did you hear that?
They had, that's their excuse.
That's lovely.
They had like 4 years to fix the disabled problem. What did they do? They probably put in non-disabled voting stuff just so that they could pull it when they said they wanted to. It's not like we trust them.
Donald Trump's no fan of the ADA. Trust me there.
Right. We have Vern Buchanan. Remember Vern?
Yes.
You were telling me
Spoke
about
with
him
him
yesterday. Accused of accepting a seven-figure yacht loan from a bank lobbying for last year's tax cut, then purchased the 73-foot vessel on the same day he voted for the measure he helped write.
Yes. He named his
Right?
boat Entrepreneur, by the way.
Right.
That's some
We have
good stuff.
Representative Duncan Hunter's alleged campaign finance violations in detail, using it as a personal bank account, which somebody said, actually, I think Chuck Todd said some years ago is actually legal.
Yes.
You used to be able
well,
to do that.
Yeah, the campaign stuff is tighter control now. Now you can use your leadership
Now.
pack that way.
Now, but you
Yes.
used to be able to do stuff, he says. I
Oh,
don't know.
well, you used to be able to float checks on the House Bank, too.
Exactly right. Anyway, with all of that, thanks so much, and I will talk to you on Monday.
Okay, let's, well, this will be a rough weekend for that guy with his Twitter machine, so we'll see what happens over the weekend. I'm pretty sure there'll be a Monday. That's my bet.
Yeah. Take care.
All right, thanks. You too. Stay safe and don't launch any nuclear attacks. Well, so that's some interesting. It would be ridiculous to spend, let's say, the rest of the program discussing the tactics of choosing a moderate Republican senator as Speaker of the House to remove their vote from the table. But wouldn't it be interesting if it happened in a state with a Democratic governor? And yada, yada. Well, that would really be something, and people would be screaming and tearing their hair out, but that would be some good hardball, and I think it would, I don't know, that would be really encouraging, I think, to the Democratic base. We never pull stuff like that, and people, I guess, in a way, are hungry for that sort of thing. It's worth thinking about, but I mean, whenever, I really love when you open up the speculation about, well, remember, the Speaker of the House doesn't have to be a member of the House. That is true. It's always been true. But, it's always been that they've chosen a member of the House because, members of the House are voting. You know what they like as between members of the House and non-members of the House? They prefer ones like themselves, just as everybody does. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on at Roots Radio. All right, let's see if we can catch up with the commentary that's been running alongside Greg's appearance. Culture of Truth has a solution for you. David Waldman, I assume me, and not the various other David Waldmans running around out there for Speaker. I am busy, and we couldn't convene the House until at least noon. I would require a car and driver to get me from the KITM World Headquarters out to the Capitol each morning. So it would delay things a little bit, but I think probably we could manage that way, and I don't even think we would be missing out all that much if we started late each day. And quite honestly, a lot of days business doesn't really convene until noon anyway, and you don't need the speaker on hand to do that either. Besides, the current speaker has gotten away with saying he hasn't had time to read any of the news all along. So I'll at least, one, I'll be informed when I arrive, but two, I'll at least have a ready-made excuse. I'm no worse than the previous guy. Anyway, let's see. Other commentary. Matthew Rigdon noting, in movies and TV shows, the opposing lawyers usually hate each other and show it in court, often because they were lovers sometime in the past. That's a part of the storyline we left out here. They may be estranged family, or they may be both. Or, for instance, they may suspect that the person wearing the neck brace is faking it, and they might drop their briefcase on the table and make a loud noise to see if they snap their head toward the briefcase without pain. An extraordinarily irresponsible thing to do, by the way, if the person was, in fact, injured and was recovering from a neck injury and you caused them to wrench their neck again. I think you should lose your license, quite honestly. Okay. It's not a real thing. Let's see. Where else have we here? Mad Hatter's comment here. The House GOP has internal corruption issues that hinder them. Trump isn't the whole issue, just most of the issue, as he comments to Greg, and that's true. Well, worth pointing out. And let's see. One additional comment here. Kate Sherrill says, it sounds like the chairman of AMI is also telling all. She sends for our consideration Ryan Goodman's tweet. Well, let's take a look at it, and then that way it'll be easier to figure out, hey, who's Ryan Goodman? Besides the fact that he's got a blue check mark, he is former special counsel at the Department of Defense from 2015 to 2016, founding co-editor-in-chief of Just_Security, and chaired prof, as a chaired professor at NYU Law School, and a former chaired professor at Harvard Law School. And, well, that's a storied career. What's the photo of it here in the background? I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's a bunch of credentials, eh? He says another shoe drops. And as you can tell from his resume, he knows all about shoes, or the dropping of them anyway. Wall Street Journal reports, and we will probably not be, well, sometimes you can read the article like once. So maybe we'll give it a shot. When they think it's important, they'll let you through once. Where is it? Let's see. I want to possibly gather up some other info that's flying by. Wall Street Journal says the chairman of the company that owns National Enquirer, that's AMI, and I said like American Media Incorporated or something like that. Anyway, the chair of the company that owns National Enquirer, and is that David Pecker, or is he some other position at AMI? Anyway, he provided prosecutors, it says here in a quote, provided prosecutors with details about payments Mr. Cohen arranged with women who alleged sexual encounters with President Trump. Well, he wasn't President Trump then, but if you've got any of those, let me know. Including, and this is all caps here, Mr. Trump's knowledge of the deals. That would, of course, make things difficult for him. And the link is to the Wall Street Journal's Twitter account saying money worries and pressure from his father and overwhelming evidence, that's another issue, inside Michael Cohen's guilty plea. The overwhelming evidence thing is the part that's really and truly interesting. Let's take a look. Let's see. We'll have to... can we get the Wall Street Journal article open, or is it just going to give us let's see what happens. I think it's going to tell me that we can't read it all. Oh, no, there it is. All right, let's read it then, by all means. Why Michael Cohen agreed to plead guilty and implicate the president. We'd all like to know that. Prosecutors had reams of evidence and a long list of counts, which also could have included the lawyer's wife. That may be part of the reason. Good call. Rebecca Davis O'Brien, Nicole Hong, and Joe Palazzo. Oh, not Palazzo, but Palazzolo. Palazzolo. How does he say that? Well, give me a call, Joe. Sorry about that. Michael Cohen had many reasons to play ball last weekend when his legal team sat down to talk to federal prosecutors. The Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office had testimony from Mr. Cohen's accountant and business partners, along with bank records, tax filings, and loan applications that implicated not only Mr. Cohen in a potential criminal activity, but also his wife, who filed taxes jointly with her husband. That's the danger of signing those things. Prosecutors signaled Cohen would face nearly 20 criminal counts, potentially carrying a lengthy prison sentence and staggering financial penalties. Adding to the pressure, David Pecker, the chairman of American Media Incorporated, which publishes the National Enquirer, provided prosecutors with details about payments Mr. Cohen arranged with women who alleged sexual encounters with President Trump, including Mr. Trump's knowledge of the deals. This account of how Mr. Cohen went from pugnacious defender of the president to turning on Mr. Trump is based on details provided by people close to Mr. Cohen and others briefed on the discussions with prosecutors. For weeks, the president had been distancing himself from Mr. Cohen, including by stopping paying his longtime attorney's legal fees, making clear amid the pressure that he was on his own. Under oath on Tuesday, before a packed courtroom, Mr. Cohen created a spectacular moment without parallel in American history. That's a broad, it's accurate, but it's as splashy a statement as you could make. Spectacular moment without parallel in American history when he confessed to 2 crimes that he said he committed at the behest of the man who would become president. Mr. Cohen pleaded guilty to 8 federal crimes, including tax evasion and making false statements to a bank, capping a months-long investigation into his business dealings and work as Mr. Trump's personal lawyer. For the president, it opens up a perilous new legal front. And not just because of the way that Michael Cohen could possibly implicate him in some of these schemes, but because we're watching the president get on television and say, these things aren't crimes. And I think he thinks they're not crimes because he's never been charged with making false statements to a bank. He just thinks that's how you get bank loans. It just happens to be the case no one's ever bothered to prosecute him because he was just not really a worthwhile target for the most part. Just nobody really cared if Donald Trump went to jail before. Now people do, and maybe it will become an issue. But yeah, he thinks it shouldn't be a crime if it is one, and he thinks it's run-of-the-mill stuff. That's how you get bank loans. No one ever got me in trouble for it before, so they're not going to now. Well, they just gave you a pass before. They didn't care about putting you in jail. That's the big difference between then and now. Mr. Cohen, in court, said Mr. Trump directed him to arrange payments during the 2016 campaign to 2 women who alleged they had sexual encounters with Mr. Trump. The payments violated caps on campaign contributions and a ban on corporate contributions, prosecutors said, and we've explained how that works in the past. On Wednesday, Mr. Trump denied he directed Mr. Cohen to buy the women's silence. Contradicting earlier statements, the president said he became aware of the payments to the women, quote, later on, 2 weeks, and said Mr. Cohen was reimbursed from his personal funds, not his 2016 campaign coffers. The investigation is continuing, according to a person familiar with the matter. Although the plea deal doesn't require Mr. Cohen's cooperation, it leaves the door open for him to talk with both the Southern District of New York and Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The court restricted Mr. Cohen's travel to New York City, Chicago, where he owns taxi medallions, South Florida, where his parents live, and Washington, D.C., where the Special Counsel's office is based. The deal doesn't preclude further prosecutions, including other charges against Mr. Cohen. Okay, very interesting. And he also can't go to Prague if he wanted to go there for, let's say, the first time. Can't do it anymore. Prosecutors built their case partly by using materials seized in the April 9th raids of Mr. Cohen's home, office, and hotel, including recordings and other items that provided evidence of campaign finance violations. Investigators quickly zeroed in on Mr. Cohen's relationship with American media, including its role brokering deals on behalf of Mr. Trump. Mr. Pecker had been an open supporter of Mr. Trump's candidacy. Prosecutors say Mr. Pecker offered to help keep quiet negative stories about Mr. Trump that might come to the National Enquirer, a practice in the business known as catch and kill. And they could very easily decide very soon to say, yeah, that also likely represents an illegal contribution to the campaign. We'll see. American media executives were involved in both hush money deals that formed the basis of Mr. Cohen's guilty plea to campaign finance violations, prosecutors said on Tuesday. One was the $130,000 payment to Stephanie Clifford, that's Stormy Daniels, as part of an agreement to keep her from publicly discussing an alleged affair with Mr. Trump. The payment was first reported by the Wall Street Journal in January. There, now we have that answer. We were wondering about that yesterday when Armando was on the air. The second was a $150,000 payment to former Playboy model Karen McDougal for her exclusive story of an alleged extramarital affair with Mr. Trump, a story that was purchased by American media in August of 2016 at Mr. Cohen's urging and then never published. The payment was first reported by the Journal in November of 2016. And let's see. On April 5th, days before the raids, Mr. Trump told reporters on Air Force One, or as I now call it, Air Force Individual One, he didn't know about the payment to Ms. Clifford and referred questions about the matter to Mr. Cohen. You'll have to ask Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump said. Michael is my attorney. Okay. Let's see. Oh, by the way, do we have room, Armando wants to know, to go back to the well with a response to Trump, Dershowitz, and Giuliani on a campaign finance crime? Do we have time for that? I think we do. Let's plow through this Wall Street Journal thing. I think that actually kind of sets it up because that's a large part of what's in here. So let's see what the Wall Street Journal can bring up with it, and Armando can comment on that and other things. And anytime too. You want to sit in on the reading of the story, that's fine too. Mr. Cohen, who that night was staying aboard the yacht of Trump donor Franklin Haney, which was docked in Miami. What are we talking about? What day are we? April 5th, days before the raids. There we are. That's when Trump told reporters on Air Force Individual One he didn't know about the payment, and you'll have to ask Michael Cohen. So Cohen at the time is staying aboard the yacht of Trump donor Franklin Haney. Who's that guy? Look him up. Lock him up. Why not? So he grew irate on the ship soon after Mr. Trump made his remarks, distancing himself from the Clifford payment. According to a person familiar with the episode, Mr. Cohen was swearing loudly as others on the boat were sipping their drinks. The person said, "Oh, he was swearing while other people were sipping drinks? That's horrible." I don't know why that. All right, it's nice detail. I guess it just shows, the rich are different sort of la-di-da lifestyle. Anyway, the search warrant executed on April 9th sought materials and information, and drinks probably, related to a wide range of communications, including ones related to the payments to Ms. Clifford and Ms. McDougal. At the same time, investigators subpoenaed Mr. Pecker, American Media, and the Trump Organization, Mr. Trump's business. By the way, note to prosecutors, it may be a little late, but, I don't know. Maybe you did something. Maybe you didn't. Now that I know where Mr. Cohen was staying at the time that he heard Mr. Trump's remarks and grew irate, I would say I would search the yacht of Trump donor Franklin Haney, quite honestly. Maybe really for no other reason than to inconvenience Trump donor Franklin Haney. But I don't know. I'm sure they swept it clean in the moment I've said this. Franklin Haney's listening closely, and he will, dust for fingerprints and make sure that there's no evidence available. But, they raided what? House, hotel room, and office. I would say perhaps, the premises he was staying in when he found out that he was being thrown under the bus would be a good place to search, too. I'd like to know if he wrote any notes while he was there or made any phone calls. Let's get those phone records. Although it probably would have made it on his own cell phone anyway. So perhaps that's an antiquated notion of policing. But, like I said, this doesn't bother me any to make trouble for major Trump donors and their yachts. Prosecutors had reason to be concerned that without raiding Mr. Cohen's office, records could have been deleted without record and without recourse for law enforcement, according to a court filing. Quite true. Prosecutors in the Southern District said the investigation into Mr. Cohen was, in part, a referral from the special counsel's office. It isn't clear when the referral took place or if the office was already investigating Mr. Cohen when the referral came through. Special counsel's office was examining Cohen's finances since at least October 2017. Prior to the raids, investigators had already obtained covert search warrants on multiple email accounts used by Mr. Cohen. That's interesting. Prosecutors said in a court filing, but his emails is what they were saying. Earlier this year, they also had subpoenaed Cohen's former accountant, Jeffrey A. Getzel, Getzel, who handled Mr. Cohen's personal and business tax returns. In May, Michael Avenatti, lawyer for Ms. Clifford, released a memo detailing payments made to Mr. Cohen from companies including AT&T and Novartis, remember them, as well as an investment firm linked to a Russian oligarch. I can't remember the name of that one, but maybe it still rings a bell with you. But okay, I recall reading about those. Federal agents investigated whether Mr. Cohen lobbied Trump administration officials on behalf of the companies without registering as a lobbyist, as the Journal previously reported. Initially, Cohen seemed unlikely to turn on the president. Although their relationship was at times turbulent, Trump appreciated Cohen's absolute loyalty. On the day of the raids, Trump called the move a disgrace and a witch hunt. Can you believe he called it a witch hunt? Soon after the April raids, Mr. Cohen's relationship with Mr. Trump began to deteriorate. The estrangement began over legal bills, said a person who has spoken with Mr. Cohen about the matter. The Trump family covered part of Mr. Cohen's legal fees after the raids, but then stopped paying. You see, you only buy yourself trouble with getting cheap, Trump. But then again, he probably just doesn't have the cash for it. Cohen felt exposed. Public comments by Rudy Giuliani, Trump's, I guess, new lawyer, put distance between the president and Cohen and further alienated the attorney, the person said. Mr. Cohen told associates and friends he felt Mr. Trump didn't have his back and vented that the president hadn't personally offered to pay his legal bills in the Manhattan investigation, which he said were bankrupting him. Mr. Cohen's troubles, and by the way, Cohen far from the first person to say that Trump was bankrupting him by leaving him hanging out there and throwing him under the bus, etc. It's like, get in line, pal. But once again, just want to point out to people who are still hanging on with Trump, Trump ruins everybody he comes in contact with. Your time will come. He will throw you under the bus. He will ruin you. You will find yourself bankrupted when you thought you were going to be protected and rewarded for your loyalty. I love loyalty. Everybody's got to be loyal to me. He will pave the road with your face. He doesn't care. He will destroy you. That's what you're there for, as a buffer. But he doesn't like people. He doesn't want to share any assets or money or information or anything at all with you, whether you're working for the administration, working for his campaign, just a Mar-a-Lago member, whatever it is. If he can elevate his stature by standing on your dead body, you better believe that's what he's going to do the day he discovers how to do it. Mr. Cohen told associates and friends he didn't feel like Trump didn't have his back, right? He's bankrupting him. Cohen's troubles increased in May when Evgeny Gene Friedman, a New York City taxi mogul who managed taxi medallions owned by Mr. Cohen and his relatives, pleaded guilty to state criminal tax fraud and agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in their probe of Mr. Cohen. By then, prosecutors and the IRS had focused on Cohen's personal income taxes. Imagine if you got Trump's. In conversations with a potential witness in June and July, investigators asked very pointed questions about various tax filings, according to a person familiar with the conversations. They knew what they wanted. They knew what they had, and they went after it, the person said. In late June, Mr. Cohen openly broke with Mr. Trump. A personal turning point for Cohen was a conversation with his father, Maurice Cohen, a Holocaust survivor. I heard about this yesterday. This is very interesting. Mr. Cohen's father urged him not to protect the president, saying he didn't survive the Holocaust to have his name sullied by Mr. Trump. According to a person who was told about the conversation, the elder Mr. Cohen couldn't be reached for comment. Imagine being a Holocaust survivor and being like, you really should not defend the defender of Nazis and the employer of Nazis in the White House. That is a point. We were wondering when that might come up. On June 20th, Mr. Cohen stepped down from his position as, and remember he had this position, Republican National Committee's deputy finance chairman, and tweeted his first public criticism of his former boss. June 20th. Up to that point, he's RNC Deputy Finance Chairman. Don't forget that. And his tweet was, as the son of a Polish Holocaust survivor, the images and sounds of this family separation policy are heart-wrenching. What do you know? The tweet no longer appears on Mr. Cohen's Twitter account, by the way. By then, Mr. Cohen had hired New York lawyer Guy Petrillo to represent him in the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's probe. The choice of Mr. Petrillo, who had once served as the chief of the office's criminal division, was seen as a sign that Mr. Cohen hoped to cooperate. Mr. Petrillo began to signal this intent to prosecutors. Shortly after his hiring, Mr. Cohen told ABC News in an interview that his first loyalty was to his family and country, not to the president. In July, a recording became public that Mr. Cohen surreptitiously made of a conversation he had with Trump in September 2016 about buying the rights to McDougal's story. The president has denied the affair. The president's legal team had waived attorney-client privilege on the recording, which had been seized in the April 9th raids. The week of the recording's release, the investigation appeared to accelerate. People familiar with the investigation said. Federal prosecutors faced an early September deadline to charge Mr. Cohen. After that, they would have to wait until the midterm elections under Department of Justice guidelines or risk criticism of potentially affecting the election's outcome. That trope has come up again. They had follow-up witness interviews scheduled as recently as this week. a person familiar with the investigation said, but canceled them as the plea agreement came together over the weekend. Given the Justice Department's policy of not indicting sitting presidents, wait for him to stand up, a guilty plea for Mr. Cohen and his public implication of Mr. Trump were among the strongest outcomes prosecutors could have hoped for, according to former federal prosecutors. For prosecutors, the guilty plea meant they could avoid a contentious trial and free up resources to pursue other investigations. On Monday, federal prosecutors in Manhattan filed a court document in a case then labeled as U.S. v. John Doe, indicating a guilty plea was forthcoming. By Tuesday night, hours after Mr. Cohen implicated Mr. Trump in a possible crime, one of Mr. Cohen's lawyers, Lanny Davis, appeared on cable news shows to say Mr. Cohen wouldn't accept the pardon from Mr. Trump and, quote, is more than happy to tell the special counsel all that he knows, unquote. I would not trust that as far as I could throw either Lanny Davis or Michael Cohen, but it's an interesting thing to say. I don't really believe it's true, and I think that if a pardon was forthcoming, I don't know that it is anymore, but if this was an elaborate game to help him make it through this stage and then later accept the pardon, I'd believe it, and I wouldn't be shocked by it in the least. That's the end of the story. It is coming up on the next break, so won't be much in the way in between now and then. But Armando, if you're still available and you'd like to chime in on this subject or bring things back to Giuliani and Dershowitz, we certainly have room for that. Let's see. Anything else that we ought to perhaps cram in there before the next break? Let's see. What will fit? That I'm not really sure. Oh, you know what? Here we go. This will fit. Totally unrelated to the Trump thing, I guess. Although, wink, wink. It really isn't, I suppose. Republican hypocrisy story. Accompanied with a tweet of holy effing S from Ian Millhiser, pointing at this story. Here comes Armando. Hey, Armando, you're just in time to hang on for the for the break. But let's.
Actually, you talked about Cohen again, so I had actually sent you a message because I have more on this based on the silliness that's been talked about.
Excellent.
But go ahead.
Okay. Well, we're about 2 minutes from our break, so if it's. Do you think it's something we ought to hang on to for afterwards?
Yeah, finish your story.
Okay, well, in that case,
Cohen.
This story I just wanted to switch to very quickly was a different on another Republican hypocrisy story we can cram in 2 minutes, reported by Mother Jones, Hannah Levintova, or perhaps Levintova, depending on how it's pronounced. The Trump official overseeing migrant girls' health care once wrote he couldn't, quote, support abortion for any reason, unquote. This is Scott Lloyd, I guess the guy who has been to court back and forth trying to prevent any immigration detainees from seeking abortions while inside the United States, and that's been a contentious issue. But it only becomes more contentious as we find out that basically everything you ever thought about Republican anti-abortion lunatics and what they would do if there was an unwanted pregnancy in their lives is absolutely 100% true. As you might have imagined, they just basically say, it involves me, and so I will secretly seek an abortion for women that I have made pregnant, but I will deny anyone else the right to avail themselves of the same solution because I'm a gimmitarian and a horrible, horrible person, and I don't care about anyone but myself. And just like Scott DeJarle before him, just honestly, you want to know something? Just like Donald Trump right now, this guy, we're just waiting for the shoe to drop on the Donald Trump abortion stories, but we've got this one instead. Scott Lloyd reported it in Mother Jones that, I guess I'm not certain when the affair took place, and maybe I can scan the story in between and over the break. But here we are. In the fall of 2004 is, I guess, where this guy's saga begins. Lloyd shared a 6-page essay with 80 or so classmates in his section of a course called Catholic Social Teaching. And guess what his opinion on abortion was in the class called Catholic Social Teaching. According to 7 students in the course, which explored religious, ethical, and legal thinking on issues including abortion, healthcare, and poverty, Lloyd's essay was an assignment shared on a listserv ahead of a group discussion. It arrived to unusual furor. How do you like that? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I heard everybody saying, "You've got to read what Scott wrote," recalled one student who, like other classmates, declined to speak on the record. And, well, guess what? The debate unfolded in unusually personal terms as other students shared their own experience with abortion, shouted and confronted Lloyd, and I guess you can imagine that the scene was raucous and only serves to highlight the hypocrisy we'll talk about later. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The story is actually quite lengthy that I'm reading about Scott Lloyd, and quite honestly, I mean, I don't know how much I care about Scott Lloyd. What you need to know is that he is a horrible hypocrite on abortion, although he did say he prayed a lot about the one that he drove this woman to, hoping to convince her not to do it is now what he's, I guess, saying. And apparently his paper in 2004 was quite offensive and caused a lot of angry discussion, including, the claim that, if you want to avoid pregnancy, just abstain from sex, like not me. And then went on to say, I guess people were saying I couldn't read all the way through it, even in preparation for the discussion, once I got to the point where he was comparing abortion to the Holocaust. And I think that's likely to turn a lot of people off. Read it for yourself if you like, if you care that much about Scott Lloyd. But suffice to say that the story is what it is. When they need to avail themselves of abortion services, they're willing to do it, even if they're unhappy and have to pray for a whole week. But the rest of you idiots are not to be trusted. So that's basically the gimmitarian position. It should be illegal for everybody unless I need it. Just by the way, as you can be sure that if we have to wait to prosecute Donald Trump, that guy's going to love plea deals all of a sudden. They should be illegal unless I need one, in which case they're great and there should be a statue of me. By the way, where in the world have they ever erected the statue of a defendant who made a plea deal?
Robert E. Lee, I would argue.
That's, you know what? That could be true.
Well,
that should be illegal, and we should pull down the statues.
They did not prosecute him for treason.
That is
let
true.
Him go about his way
there
when
was
he
not
agreed to lay down arms and not continue to rebel.
I mean, there has to be a formal plea deal on paper. Oh, all right, fine. Appomattox, I saw him sign it. I saw a painting. But they didn't say that he was at fault personally. Okay.
That's right. He did not do an allocution, is correct.
Yeah, so, all right. Well, that's the big difference. But that's a good point. I'll take that one. All right. So we were discussing over the break what we wanted to, we're going back to these criminals because it's important, and they're traitors, and they stole an election, and we should talk about it.
It's frustrating to me, David, because, I will toot our own horn. We've understood this campaign finance story with Cohen from the day the story broke. We've discussed it and described what it all means and what it could mean. Mm-hmm. I remember distinctly you and I discussing, if Donald Trump had just pulled money out of his pocket and paid it and reported it as a campaign contribution to himself, and then made up a description, which he could have made up after the election, by the way,
Right.
he would not have committed a felony.
That's
I
likely
understand
true.
it, but he didn't do that. You can't say, well, it can't be a crime because I could have done this. If you had done that, it wouldn't be a crime. It's true. But
yeah.
that's not what you did.
Well,
Alan
right.
Dershowitz has been running around. Now, Alan Dershowitz,
Yeah.
full disclosure, I've always thought he was a buffoon
Yeah.
for 25 years. I know he's a Harvard law professor and yada, yada, but he's a buffoon.
Well, yes.
This notion that he's some revered figure in the law is nonsense.
He's a famous guy.
He's a famous guy is what he is. He didn't write any important treatises on the law. He didn't do anything that was groundbreaking. He did nothing. He's just a guy who gets on TV a lot. Yes, he's a Harvard law professor. That means something, sure, but there's nothing towering about Alan Dershowitz.
No,
Lawrence
we have
Tribe, for example.
built that for ourselves. We built
Lawrence,
the myth.
Lawrence Tribe, by contrast.
Yeah. Okay.
For people, you see him now sometimes on TV.
Yes.
Lawrence Tribe wrote the treatise that is taught in every law school, or most law schools, on constitutional law. I don't know if people know that, but Lawrence Tribe is a towering figure in the study of constitutional law in the 20th century.
Well, all right.
You can like him or hate him or think he's past his prime, but he was that. Okay?
Yes.
Anyway. But now, Alan Dershowitz, who's never opined on campaign finance law in his entire life, is trotted out as an expert on this, too, because he's an expert on everything.
Why not?
Like Jonathan Turley.
Yeah.
Alan Dershowitz doesn't know jack about
no, that's a
campaign
great
finance
comparison.
law.
By the way,
Yeah.
I mean, another person that you're likely to. Television does this. When you see people constantly on television and you get to remember their name because you've seen them 100 times, you tend to think, look, television producers know what they're doing. They're bringing him on because he's a foremost expert, and he's not. He's the guy who'll answer the phone
For Trump. And
yeah.
you
Well,
know,
in that case, yes.
And they think that this little cutesy fight, him and Tubin, and I like Tubin. Tubin's good on a lot of things, but he's not an expert on campaign finance law either. You want to talk about campaign finance law? You bring on Rick Haase, you bring on Norm Eisen, you bring on people, Bob Bauer. Those people, that's what they do for a living. That's their thing.
Yes. Okay.
But, we don't want those guys. We want a fight between Jeff Toobin and Alan Dershowitz. And it's frustrating because Toobin doesn't actually do a very good job of explaining these things because it's not his thing. It's not what he does. And, of course, that's not what Dershowitz. So, anyway, Dershowitz is running around. And then there's this recapitulation of it.
What does Dershowitz teach, actually, or did he teach?
He taught a lot of criminal law.
Okay. So there's at least that. But he's out of his depth on campaign finance.
Criminal law covers the gamut. He covers the basic principles, mens rea. You went to law school, right, David? If you ever took the criminal law, criminal process,
Sure.
I don't remember any of it. I took those classes, but I'm no expert.
Yes.
What I did do was figure out campaign finance law stuff, mostly because of our interest in elections. So we look at this a lot, and we try to figure out what's right, what's wrong. Of course, the real expert amongst our group, as you know, is Adam Bonin. And Adam does it for a living. Adam would be someone that actually should be on TV talking about these things. Because he really there's no one I respect more on knowing these things than Adam. I say that sincerely, not just because he's our friend. Here's what Dershowitz said, because this is actually a fairly simple case. This is not a difficult, is this expenditure permitted, blah, blah, blah. The expenditure probably would have been permitted, maybe. But we're given that the expenditure itself would have been permitted. Dershowitz says, hey, Trump could have done it. Again, so what? He didn't do it. But even his defense makes no sense. But let me take you through the story so you understand something. First, let's start with that premise.
All right.
Trump did not pay Stormy Daniels. Right?
Right.
He did not. And let's say you're saying that, well, he lent the money or he agreed take a loan from Michael Cohen
Yeah.
to forward the money, to advance the money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a loan.
Yeah.
That's a contribution.
Okay.
That's also illegal. All right. So when you start with that premise, when you understand that Cohen, by the way, has two illegalities. He made the payment to further a campaign.
Yeah.
Right? To assist the Trump campaign. That's illegal because it was well in excess of the $2,700 limit. And he did it knowingly. It's a felony. Michael Cohen committed a felony if Donald Trump's not involved at all. Donald Trump never knew. He committed in two ways. The amount was too high.
Yeah.
And he did it through a corporation.
Right.
Essential Consultants. Both of those things are felonies. Because corporations, believe it or not, cannot contribute directly to a campaign. So there's a double whammy. Mm-hmm. So what you and I studied from the beginning is, wow, it's big. So the real question is Donald Trump going to be able to deny any knowledge or involvement? Yes. Because if he was involved, he conspired to violate the campaign finance laws.
Yes.
Well, and remember, Trump was denying it through March and April.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the famous scene of US One on Air Force One, where he was asked, "No, I didn't know anything about it."
This is the Ask Michael Cohen thing. All right. Yeah, we were just reading about that.
Okay, so he said he didn't know anything about it. But then on May 2nd, 2018, on the Sean Hannity show, Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, blew that wide open, said Trump's lying. He knew about it, and not only that, he reimbursed him for it.
Yes, thinking that would somehow, I guess, help Trump's hoped-for original story that because he reimbursed him, that he ultimately paid for it, which he should have done if he wanted. He shouldn't have done it at all, but if he wanted to avoid criminal liability later on for himself or others, then he should have just said, I am supposed to be a billionaire. Here's the money.
All right. But so let's go with Dershowitz's defense. But he did pay, but Trump paid him back with his personal money. So it's like he made the contribution, and he could do that because blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Skipping all the other illegalities. But let's just go right to that point.
Okay.
Trump did not pay Cohen with his personal money. Trump, and here's the thing. Let's go back to the big stack of papers day where Trump was showing how he was going to be separated from the companies.
Yes, right, okay.
Okay, so if Trump's separated from the companies when he sits to be president, he's not directing the Trump organization to do anything anymore, is he?
Not supposed to be. I mean,
so the Trump organization pays back Michael Cohen.
Yeah, did they do that before?
No, this was paid in 2017. Remember, the phony retainer payments, and the phony legal bills.
All right. This I remember. I just don't remember the dates on it. Okay, so if it happens in 2017,
in February, March, April 2017, basically 3 payments.
If it happens in 2017 and it comes from the Trump organization, that's not supposed to be his pocket. It's not supposed to be his pocket, even if he's.
His pocket is a matter of law. As a matter of law, it is not his pocket.
And it's not supposed to be anyway. And even if he had lost the election and remained head of the Trump organization, that's still not his pocket.
Exactly.
So
it has to come out of the bank account of Donald J. Trump.
Yes.
And maybe he has to get money, get a dividend declared from the Trump organization, and pay tax on it. Well, that's his problem. That's what you've got to do.
He's always done
Dershowitz's theory.
Yeah.
Trump did not personally pay the money back.
Though, Harvard or not.
In fact, it would be a new crime. A campaign contribution to the Trump campaign by the Trump organization. That is illegal. Yes. That is a crime.
Right. Trump doesn't believe it's the case because, well, one, he doesn't want to be in trouble. And two, he's just always done business this way. He treats the Trump organization and the Trump Foundation and other people's foundations, by the way, as his wallet, as his personal piggy bank, because no one's ever stopped him.
This is shades of Pam Bondi. He said, I'm going to give you a contribution. What's in the Trump Foundation? Let's give her $25,000 to close the Trump University case.
Right. And
that's not his money.
No. And there's lots of, we've discussed this at length too, is he doesn't have the capacity to understand that. Plus, he's never been in trouble for it because no one's ever bothered, because who cares about whether you put Donald Trump in jail? So he interprets that to mean it's not illegal. If it was illegal, I'd have gotten in trouble for it.
Right. Well, now he's in trouble, by the way,
Yeah.
the Trump Foundation in New York. I don't know if you discussed that story today.
We haven't,
Importantly.
but yes, it is.
I'll give you a rundown, but let me just finish this thing, because Dershowitz is it's blatherous nonsense.
Yes.
Anybody, just take the facts as known. The Trump Organization is who paid Michael Cohen by falsifying invoices, by the way, and calling them legal services rendered in 2017.
Yes.
If it was a reimbursement for a payment that Essential Consultants made, or Michael Cohen made, by the way, the company who made the payment was Essential Consultants. Michael Cohen didn't make it personally. Paying Michael Cohen can't be a reimbursement to Essential Consultants.
Yeah, another guy who forgets because he's never been arrested for it, and forgets that he's supposed to be, again, another aspect of this, right? Again, you have a limited liability corporation at your disposal. It is supposed to limit your liability. You are the worst lawyer in the world, literally.
You literally have to not commingle your personal expenses and accounts with a corporation. Otherwise, what happens is what's called piercing the corporate veil.
Yeah,
that is,
many
you will be personally liable for the debts and obligations of the company, of the corporation.
Yes, it is a big pain in the butt. We know this, that you have to maintain this separate account. But again, this is to limit your liability when you commingle the funds. Yeah, I mean, otherwise it's just keep all the money in one pot. But if you don't want to, if you get caught out on something that you've done wrong, the entity you use to do this wrongdoing is on the hook, whether it's your personal bank account or a limited liability corporation. The reason you set up another corporation is so that they can't get to it because they're holding you personally liable, or vice versa. Something your company does, they can't come after you. You build a firewall to help that happen. If you violate the firewall constantly by moving funds back and forth, they're just going to say this was not a real, it's not a real thing. It was a part of a scheme to defraud. Sorry, now you're both on the hook. We can drain both bank accounts.
That's exactly right. And that's what happened. In the sense that the Trump Organization paid Michael Cohen personally. That's not a reimbursement to Essential Consultants who did an illegal, which was illegal in the first instance without going any further. It's also illegal if the Trump Organization itself, as opposed to Donald Trump personally, reimbursed the campaign. That's another felony campaign contribution by a corporation. This time, the Trump Organization. The Trump Organization should be indicted if Dershowitz and Rudy are right about what they're saying.
Yeah.
I'm
All
not
right,
kidding.
so you're next. No. I'm
not kidding. This is the truth. But their theory is felony. And by the way, if what they're saying is true, Donald Trump directed the Trump Organization to make an illegal campaign contribution. He's personally on the hook again as well.
Yes.
Their defense makes no sense to anybody that understands this. Now, I saw Chuck Todd and George Will talking as if they understood a gosh darn thing about this case. They didn't understand it. It was pathetic. Chuck Todd shouldn't talk about these things. You get an expert. Let him explain it to you. Then you can talk about it.
I guess so.
Can we have some experts on TV that can explain this to people? Is that against the law? Is that a crime?
Experts are busy. That's one thing. So, and perhaps they just would rather not get involved. But, actually it occurs to me now, as you were saying it, if the contention is that the Trump Organization paid this money, but Donald Trump, then you tell him, oh, by the way, if you directed the Trump Organization to do that, that's another big problem. I mean, remember, you're supposedly divested from that, and you're not directing it because you're sitting as president. But P.S., the choice basically is, do you want to get in trouble for violating telling people you divested and then illegally controlling the company anyway? Or would you rather that we say, all right, well, the Trump organization made this illegal payment, and so let's look up on the chart here who's in trouble? Eric and Donald Trump Jr. Okay. Where are those guys? We need to speak to them.
They committed a crime.
Somebody did.
Garten, whoever said, I think there's emails on this that said that Garten said change it to legal expenses.
Yeah.
Or legal fees for 2017.
Alan Garten.
I believe I read that correctly.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll need to speak to him too, and of course his boss, Eric.
Yeah, boss.
Yeah, he's like on a beach somewhere.
Saying?
What?
You see what I'm getting at? There's no defense here.
Yeah,
they're caught coming and going.
He
had one defense. He had one defense. He didn't know anything about any of this. Donald Trump.
Right. But Rudy
and
Giuliani
Michael Cohen did it, and he defrauded us by presenting false bills, et cetera, et cetera.
And that created another problem.
If he had a decent lawyer, Donald Trump, that's what he would have been arguing the whole time. And he would be calling Michael Cohen a liar. I never told him. I didn't know about it. Blah, blah. Of course, there's another aspect of this that I didn't discuss at length because the Stormy Daniels thing is so nicely clear-cut. The National Enquirer part of this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was
the McDougal payments.
Yeah.
The allegations are that they all work together. And here, Trump or Dershowitz or Giuliani have addressed the National Enquirer part of this, the David Pecker part.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one, too.
They conspired with Pecker to have Pecker's company make an illegal campaign contribution of $150,000 by a corporation.
Yes.
Which, again, exceeds the limits and is illegal per se because a corporation can't donate to a campaign.
Right. So, I guess, I'm trying to sort of construct this. I guess you could say, let's see. Who pays McDougal? McDougal gets paid by AMI. And AMI says, or is Cohen now saying, I gave the money to AMI for them to pass on.
That's right.
Okay, so all right. So the National Enquirer's parent company also makes an illegal corporate donation. And so you're in trouble, and the Trump organization is in trouble if they paid Cohen. And
David Pecker's in serious legal jeopardy right now.
Excellent. We like that.
I mean, if you read the allocution and the statements of the prosecutors in their filing, AMI is on the hook. Pecker is on the hook. They could be indicted tomorrow.
Awesome. And I guess that's in the offing because they're talking.
The Trump organization is at risk. Donald Trump, there's this argument about whether you can indict a sitting president, so that's why he might not be indicted. But if you take those allegations at face value, SDNY says all these people committed felonies.
Yeah. Now they can indict, Donald Trump Jr. isn't the sitting president. Eric Trump isn't the sitting president. It would be interesting to see them get charged. And again, individual one shows up that basically says, I approved these payments at the direction of individual one who became president of the United States. Okay.
Yeah. Let me tell you how convoluted this is. And we have 8 minutes, so I'll wrap this up and just give you a quick shot of the Trump Foundation. I'm sorry to take up the rest of your show. Rudy Giuliani tweeted at 4 a.m. And, Trump tweeted at 1:10 a.m. last night. These guys are staying up all night. They're obviously worried. But here's what Rudy typed. The liberal press doesn't tell you that Cohen has, on prior recordings, told a completely opposite story. Of course we know. He lied for months and months and months.
Yeah.
Who doesn't tell you that? We know that.
I don't know.
And then Rudy continues. The truth is he paid to protect his good friend and family. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's say that's true. You, Rudy, said on May 2nd that Trump was aware and knew and basically that was Cohen's job. He would fix these things for him. That happens all the time, according to Rudy. Remember? His law firm threw him out because he said that. No, we don't actually. We're not in the business of having a slush fund to pay hush money for mistresses, Mr. Giuliani. So please go away.
Right.
But he said some protector. Also, the payments as determined by the Edwards FEC ruling are not illegal. That's not true. The FEC determined that under the facts of the Edwards payments, the payments came long before there was any votes, and there was no threat of public exposure. There's actually a good piece by Just Security that shows you why the Edwards case is different. You and I have discussed it.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Edwards went to trial. There was a hung jury. It wasn't that it's all cleared up because the jury hung on John Edwards. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that would not help you.
That's not an argument that it isn't a crime. It's that the crime wasn't proven in the Edwards case. And what was missing was the evidence of intent. But Rudy himself is a witness to prove the intent. He said, this would have been terrible coming out on October 15th, just 3 weeks before the election. Of course he's going to pay hush money. He just made the intent argument, Rudy.
Okay.
Literally, Rudy is a witness against Trump in this case.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't meant to be, but he has turned into one, yes.
But there's another complication here.
All right.
The Edwards case did not involve corporations making contributions. It was two rich individuals, Fred Barron and Bunny Mellon. Fred Barron was dead when the trial came, so he could not testify. And Bunny Mellon was 101 and not healthy enough to testify. They didn't have the witnesses to prove the intent is what happened. Here, the guy who made the donation declared in open court that this is why he did it, and that the candidate told him to do it.
Yeah.
Bunny Mellon and Fred Barron weren't there to make that accusation against John Edwards. I guarantee you, if they were, John Edwards would have been found guilty.
I would guess so, yes.
So this is just crazy. And what's crazy about it, particularly, not only is that his lawyers, TV lawyers like Dershowitz and his supposed actual lawyer, like Rudy, are making these arguments in public, and they're just completely damning of Trump, of the Trump organization, of AMI.
I don't know why they don't see this, or maybe they don't care.
It all will happen, I think, if I actually think if SDNY does indict these guys or the companies, they're going to basically. I would love for them to cite Rudy in the indictment.
Sure, now, that would make for an interesting combination. I did this on behalf of Individual One, who later became president of the United States, who authorized me to do so on the advice of Individual 2, who is the attorney for Individual 1.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
I know you're down to the last minute, so I just want to give you a quick rundown on this. The Trump Foundation is now under a potential criminal investigation by the New York State Tax Department.
Right. Thanks in large part to David Fairnhold.
The New York AG has referred it to the tax department for potential criminal tax crimes.
Yes.
That is serious. 2 reasons. A, these are state law claims.
Yep.
Trump has no control over it. There's no pardoning anybody. Number 2, each and every one of Trump's children is now in the crosshairs.
I guess so. Although, how do you get to Ivanka and
she's
Barron?
On the board of directors.
Is she on the board? I guess so. I mean, she could say she had removed herself from the day-to-day decision-making because I'm working at the White House and stuff.
No, but a lot of this predates.
Oh, okay,
that.
I guess that's
true,
too.
Predates that.
Barron, though?
Yeah, and most
Barron
of it's self-dealing stuff. It's there's a lot of Mar-a-Lago money. Payments to Mar-a-Lago by the Trump Foundation.
Yes, that's true too. Well, that'll make for a very interesting case, and always has been an interesting case. And David Fairnhold told us all why very early on in the administration. That was a fraud through and through from day one, and it's probably in many ways the most illustrative of the way Donald Trump does business. The Trump organization, in its own way, also, but the foundation, there was just no legitimate part of the foundation ever left in all of this. So it'll be very interesting. Okay, well, thanks, Armando. Did Lawrence Tribe, by the way, write your textbook when you took con law? You mentioned that. Is that your?
He did.
Okay. I did not do the Tribe con law course. Mine was actually Cass Sunstein and Mark Tushnet and Jeffrey Stone, who we've encountered in many ways on this program, wrote my textbook, though none of them taught the course. Anyway, thanks very much, Armando. It's well worth doing. I think we add a lot of value in having these discussions, even though it seems like we're going over the same ground. This needs to be hammered home because they're going to tell you the complete opposite of the truth every day on television from now to eternity. Thanks so much.
All right, David. Thank you.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, time now to stay tuned, of course, as always, for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Butman coming up next. I can't even imagine what he's going to be talking to you about in the next hour or so, but I can promise you this. Of course, there will be a twist on everything, and not only on news stories, but on the ones we've discussed. Stay tuned.